Hello Grandmasters, it's Mike from the WCA. We're going to take a look at a very important endgame and a concept that comes up quite often in games. A couple of things you have to do before you get into this lesson is you have to, one, adjust your eyes. You're actually playing the black pieces, and you should be able to pick that up from the notation that you see at the bottom of the board. Notice that black has the 7 and 8 rank to the left of the screen. And the odd question would be, well, what are the kings doing on opposite sides of the board? Well, with a little examination, you can see that these two players have begun a pawn race. So the only way you can win this game really is for you to queen and not allow your opponent to queen, because if both of you put queens on the board, unless there's some odd situation where there's a tactic where you can win the queen, chances are the game will end in a draw, because one queen against the other, provided there are no tricks, there's going to be no checkmate. So anyway, what happens here in this game is very, very important, and it's a good resource for you to have as a chess player. Now, please spend a lot of time with this lesson. So one helpful hint might be to set this exact position up on the board and then pause the video. As you're watching it, find out where your pause button is, listen to some explanations, look at the positions, and just pause the video. And that's very helpful, especially when you're not exactly sure what to do. So we'll give you the answers as we go through the position, but it's really helpful for you to work them out for yourself. If you get them wrong, no big deal, but if we just give you the answers all the way through, it's not going to help as much. It's really the difference between active learning and passive learning. Active learning is when you have a problem in front of you and you work your way through the solution without any outside help. Okay, so it's black's move in this position, and black just plays the very natural move in this position, d2. And after d2, they're one box away from queening, and white has no choice but to get on with the race. Black queens, and here white pushes the pawn and is one box away from queening. So from the black perspective, you don't really have to worry about the pawn queening right now, because if it did, you could obviously just take it. However, the question would be, well, how do we make progress? White is naturally going to protect that pawn with their king at some point, and then how exactly are we going to get that pawn away from white? Well, the only way you're going to get it away is you're going to have to take it with your queen, and your king is going to have to be attacking the pawn at the same time. Otherwise, obviously, if your queen takes the pawn, the white king will just take back and you would have a draw. So we're going to have to move our king up the board. Well, it's safe to do that right now, because again, white cannot queen the pawn without you just taking it. And then we have to ask, well, where exactly should our king go as we move up the board? We're going to give you a couple of hints. In this position, the move king b3 would work really, really well. The reason why it works well is you'll notice the arrows that we drew coming from white's back rank. Remember, the first rank, the number 1 up there, is really where white began the game. In this position, you'll notice that black has 2 open files. Look at the arrows. One is leading directly to the pawn, the other directly to the king. This is going to give us a chance to follow this rule of thumb that's pretty easy to remember. And basically it says, when the king and the pawn that you're attacking are connected like they are now, in this position they're diagonally connected, the key is to attack the king from the file. When the king separates from the pawn, we're going to attack the pawn from the file. And each time we attack one of those pieces, we're going to move and come as close as we can to that piece with our queen. And you'll see very shortly how that will work. So, next idea. Let's take away the arrows for a moment, and let's look at the highlighted square at the bottom of the board, the d8 square. Well, that's basically the promised land for white. If that pawn can successfully land on d8 and queen, excellent chance for a draw. The problem for white is, if they're in check, they can't queen. At least not in this. At least if you're not attacking the king from the back from the file, as we mentioned. The other key fact to know about that square is that is exactly where we want the white king to be. Because if we can force the white king to d8, the highlighted square that you're looking at, then we have time to bring our king up the board. And our king right now is up on b3. So, going back, with our king on c2 in this position, there are a couple of mistakes just waiting to be had here. Let's show you an obvious one. Moving the king to d3. Bad move. You can see that you just walked your king and queen directly into the same line. White queens with check. King has to go and protect the queen. White trades queens. Game over. Draw. That's a sad way to finish this game because you really have a win here and you should win the game. All right, let's go back. Here's another one. Not so easy to see, but it's really just as bad a mistake. And that's king c3. Looks innocent enough. Looks like we achieve our objective of moving the king up the board. Remember that white cannot queen in this position because you just take it. However, after king c7, with careful examination of the board, you're going to see that white is safe from all of black's checks, at least any reasonable check. You really cannot stop white from queening on the next move. And that's kind of an embarrassing situation because you do have a win here if you follow the rule of attacking the king from an open file. So let's go back. Here's the position. It's our move. We're going to play in this position king b3, and again as a reminder, we're doing that to keep these two files open, one leading to the king, the other to the pawn. Okay, white's move. Well, white only has one choice. They can't queen, because if they queen, we just take it, and we have an easy win. So they're going to play this move, king to c7. Go back for a minute, let's take a look at that move. White is going to protect the pawn and the queening square. So now white is threatening to queen. So here's our rule. The king and the pawn are together. Which piece do we attack? And again, when we ask a question like this, pause the video, guess the move. And here's the rule one more time. King and the pawn together, attack the king from as close as you can on the same file. The king is on the c file, which would mean we play queen c2 check. And again, notice the queen on the same line as the king. White's turn. Well, white's best is probably king b7, getting out of check, threatening to queen again. After king b7, obviously black cannot move their king up the board. It's not time because white's threatening to queen. If you play king up, white simply queens, and there's no way that you're going to win this game. So after king b7, what does the rule say? King and the pawn are separated. Attack the pawn on the same file as the pawn as close as you can come. Well, the queen on c2 has three moves on the d file that attack the pawn, but which one is the closest? And again, at any time, pause the video and make sure you memorize the pattern. The correct move would be queen to d3. So after queen d3, you'll notice the pawn cannot queen because of the attack and the coverage of the d8 square. Black will simply just take the pawn. So white connects again with the pawn, protecting it, and at the same time covering the queening square. The correct move is queen c4. Getting closer, it's kind of a zigzag pattern you're making with your queen, forcing the king to leave the pawn. And if he goes, let's say, to b7, again, behind the pawn as close as you can come. The correct move is queen d5. Now, queen d5 happens to be a check, but we're not concerned with the check in this position. We're concerned with the pawn. So by putting the queen behind the pawn, we're forcing white to protect it again, which they do by king c7. We play queen c5 check. The pattern should become familiar by now. White separates. We attack the pawn as close as we can come, and it's very important that you follow that rule, as you'll see why. Once you're on d6, you'll see that the queen has come as far as she can up that open file to the pawn. And by doing so, that forces the king to the c8 square. And again, we're going to follow the same rule. Put the queen directly behind the king. However, once we come as far as we can, we're going to create what we call the magic V. Now, depending on which side of the board you're looking at, the mathematicians in the group might call that the less than sign or the greater than sign. Again, depending on what side you're looking at, we call it the magic V. It's kind of a V standing on its side. And when you get that formation, with careful examination, you'll see that the white king must go to the queening square. Because to get out of check, the only other option would be to go to b8, and that's just really bad because you take the pawn and you finish with a queen and king checkmate. So by creating the V, you force the king to the queening square. And by doing so, it gives us time to do what? Bring the king up. Once our king comes up, we're 2 steps now away from the pawn. Once both of our pieces are attacking that pawn, we can simply take it and finish the game with a simple queen and king checkmate. But we still have some work to do. White's turn. King e7, best. King e8, kind of a mistake, because king e8 actually allows us to steal a move and bring our king up again. And if you look carefully, I'll highlight it for you, you'll see that the pawn can't move, it's pinned. So in that position, black would just steal a move and get the king closer. So from this position, white's going to play their best and play king e7. All right, here we go again. What's the rule? Are the king and the pawn together or separated? Well, they're together. One is on the E file, the other is on the D file. They're connected. So you have to attack the king from the file. Which file? The E file. So queen E4 check. And again, white's just going to continue. King F7. King and pawn are separated. Attack the pawn. There's the highlight. King protects the pawn. Queen E5 check. King separates. Come as close as you can to the pawn, forcing the king to protect it. Queen E6 check. And there's the V. The only problem or difference is it's on this side. So again, depending on where you're sitting, to me it looks like the greater than sign in math, but all of us at the WCA call that a magic V. Once that V is formed, white basically has 2 choices. Block the pawn, which is his best move, or move the king to F8, allowing us to just steal the pawn with an easy win. So naturally, remember, your opponents are always going to play the best moves. Always assume your opponent will play the best move. So king to d8, and that gives us time again to do what? By now you should know, bring your king closer to the pawn. King c5. And here it's important where to move the king. Just make sure your queen always has a chance to check and get into position to follow the rule that you learned, either getting behind the pawn or the white king. So by playing king c5, white again doesn't have much choice. King c7, and because of the location of our king, we get to check right away. And there, as you can see, would also force the king to the queening square. King to d8, and now you get to directly attack the pawn with the king, and with a little bit of care, king e8, you have a simple queen and king checkmate. Queen takes d7 check. King must move to f8. And if you learned this in kindergarten or first grade, you were taught to just follow the king with your king. And soon enough, he'll end up, say, in the corner, and there's your mate in 1. However, the WCA students should all be able to see checkmate in 2 moves. And again, you can pause the video if you need to, but it's mate in 2, starting with queen h7. Only move, king e8. And there's your mate in 1. Take a lot of time with this video. Go over it more than once. Set the position up on your board. Practice with this, because the next endgame video that you receive will show all the exceptions to this particular rule, and there are several of them, and they're all worthwhile, all worth knowing. For this lesson, we're going to stop with winning the pawn. In the future, you're going to see that white has many drawing chances if they have a rook's pawn or a bishop's pawn. You're going to see some very cool stalemate tricks, and then you're going to see some cool tricks that actually defeat the stalemate idea. And that's all coming in the future. So please spend a lot of time on this video. It's a really useful pattern to know. Thanks very much. We'll see you guys in class.